Hi, welcome everybody to Numerity's roundtable discussion, helping David beat Goliath, how smaller financial services firms can tackle today's real-world security threats. I'm Jerry Murphy, Senior Vice President and of Research and Consulting at Numerity's. We're an IT advisory firm. Joining me in this roundtable discussion are Dave Bove, you wave up to me. He's the Chief Technology Officer of Unity Bank. John Cole, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Peapack Gladstone Bank, and last but certainly not least, Rich Lanza, who's the Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Manasquan Bank. At Numerities, we have a cybersecurity benchmark roadmap offering that helps clients improve how they implement secure, compliant infrastructure. It certainly is no secret that cybersecurity issues are getting more serious every day. Companies are worried about real security issues, but they obviously have to deal with the immediate specter of handling regulators, auditing them to make sure they're complying with rules. And, the regulators really don't care whether you've got one branch or 1,000 branches. You have to follow all their rules. So given all that, kind of what we're trying to accomplish today and what I'm asking is, how is it that smaller financial institutions are able to both manage the issues with the compliance and regulators, as well as actually keeping your businesses secure? So the first thing I want to sort of throw out there, in nobody in particular order, is what do you see as the challenges in that environment that you have to? What are your biggest challenges, the things that keep you up at night? And Dave, why don't we start with you, and then we can just go around the room.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, I think the challenges, and there's a lot that keeps me up at night, so we won't go through all those items. But yeah, especially being a smaller community bank, I mean, there's a lot of pressure to offer the same or similar products as the large banks. Well, just extrapolating small to large, when you are a large organization, you have a large budget to allocate to cybersecurity, incident response, and training there. So it's really just trying to be competitive in the market, understanding our budget. It's a really big focus on, risk assessments and the assessments of risk. So, you're not ultimately spending, $1 million to insure something that only would cost a bank maybe $10,000. So really taking the first step with the risk assessments, understanding where your inherent risks are, layering controls, and then that continued process of evaluation is really where you have to start, so you're spending money, appropriately and wisely in the correct areas.
How about you, John?
I think when it comes to cyber threats, the unfortunate reality is that all banks are facing very similar challenges, really, no matter what size you are. And we know that because we information share, and we can see cyber criminal gangs attacking a large bank and a small bank on the same day. And there used to be this old concept, and Jerry, we were talking about security by obscurity, the premise that, small companies are unlikely to become a target of sophisticated attackers just because of their size. And I don't know if that was ever true in financial services, but, it's certainly not true today, really, for anyone. And the reality is the news is filled with companies you've never heard of being attacked by extremely sophisticated attacks. On the other hand, we've seen very large companies also fall victim to attacks, some sophisticated, some not. And obviously, what I think keeps the industry up at night is that, especially these large companies, they have smart people, right? They have large staffs, they have large budgets. Some of the issues that caused these breaches weren't necessarily majorly egregious. It's not like a computer without antivirus was open to the public internet, right? So this is a very challenging time in the cyber industry. And yes, that should be keeping everyone up at night. But as we talk, there's obviously a lot we can do to address these threats.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking as you talk, John, I mean, size is really kind of relative because you say small bank, but what is your assets at Peapack Gladstone? What are you guys, like 14 billion in assets or something like that?
Yeah, so in retail assets, we're about $6 billion, and we have a $10 billion wealth business. Just to give some size to, about a little over 500 employees. Not small, but Jerry, to your point, there's crypto companies out there with 50 people that have risks that I wouldn't even be interested in working on, right? So the size of your company It's more the risk of your business lines that you have.
That's a great point. How about you, Rich? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main challenges are always staying up to date on the threat intelligence and the IOCs as more sophisticated attacks continue to come out, right? And making sure that we have those layers in place and we're monitoring on the right pieces to make sure we're getting alerted if potentially something is going on. And I think, like John mentioned, size doesn't matter, but the big challenges is always your people, right? It only takes that one click on a link in an email that could potentially snowball into something serious. And no matter how much training you do and how many of those red flags, hey, this is what to look for, when someone's real busy and the key today is everyone wants stuff instantly, right? So we're acting so quick and we're multitasking that sometimes we're not truly paying attention and we click on that phishing email.
Yeah, and it's one thing, Rich, to say, I got some email that used to be very obvious. It wasn't an English-speaking person. It was really kludgy. You may have won money. My uncle in Nigeria is a prince, and all that's kind of pretty obvious. I had a really large client just the other day was telling me one of their challenges was they do really good at spear phishing, and they've got software that does that. But what happened was one of their clients got compromised. And so now they're getting basically a multi-factor authentication bypass because I'm getting an email from a client that was compromised. And so this is coming from a known address. Hey, it's Jane Doe from a known company. I know Jane at this company. It's completely plausible that she would be sending me an email. And now and then I end up getting a multi-factor authentication bypass because somebody I did trust was compromised. And so it's not that I was getting some obvious thing from some weird email that I covered the link. It actually came from somebody I knew and trusted. So they're getting more sophisticated.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of it. Business email compromise is huge, right? It's an easy way to try to get your foot in the door. Some of our clients that we're working with are obviously really small businesses, right? So, they're using off-the-shelf products and hoping that they're protected. And it doesn't take much, when they click on a phishing email and now their email is compromised, and we do communicate with them a lot. So like you said, there's not a red flag when we initially have that conversation with them. And then we eventually pick up on some keys, that what they're asking for or something. And, with callbacks and all that type of stuff, we were able to vet that out.
That's actually an interesting point that you bring up when you think about risk that John talked about. And you think a lot of times what people are doing, I've seen this, and it's big companies and small alike, more and more people are putting their apps instead of building them. I'm getting third-party apps and services. Now, financial institutions like yourselves that have been using for years, people like Fiserv and Jack Henry, and using their applications, but increasingly people are using Azure for their directory management. I've gone from having Exchange in my site to I'm using Office 365 on Azure, on and on. And so it's like, on the one hand, maybe it makes it easier for me to use these applications, but also is there a bigger risk? Because if Azure Active Directory gets compromised, how many of us are exposed then?
Well, and Jerry, I think that's a really good point, because I think we all deal with the struggle between security and efficiency. Because the best way to secure an environment is I unplug the computer from the outside world, and there we are. But we all know that in today's landscape, 90% of your applications that you're using are offsite online. Even pre-pandemic, there was a massive shift, to adopt the cloud, to adopt some more dynamic abilities, both internal for back office here functions as well as customers. The pandemic really accelerated that, in addition to some payment accelerations and things like that, but a lot more from the remote aspect, with the 24/7 up, which then changed the landscape for everybody. I mean, yeah. I think all of us has been in IT for many years, and remember the good old days where we just had to protect one brick and mortar building. Now you've got to, as we grow in size, assets, locations, it's more buildings, but now you're also protecting people's homes, remote users, so the landscape is challenging. And reliance on vendors is an easy solution, but introduces another risk. What is their risk appetite? What is their controls? What are their processes and procedures? Because now you're almost putting, your operations into their hands. And if they don't have the same level of risk, tolerance that you have as an organization and the same level of controls, you may be able to, sort of sleep better at night, but you're always thinking that, well, what are they doing with my data on that side and how are they protecting it?
Well, that's a great point. And to me, Dave, that whole concept of vendor management and risk management with vendors becomes impossibly recursive, right? Because it's one thing to say, you are, okay, I'm using Fiserv for this, I'm using New Era for this, here's my 3 vendors I'm dealing with. But then, well, what ones are New Era using? What ones are Fiserv using? And so they're going to be using a vendor who then uses a vendor who uses a vendor. And it's like, how do I track and guarantee every one of those through the chain is doing all the practices with all their vendors? It just becomes almost impossible to track all that.
Well, and it would be a dream if I had 3 vendors to manage. But I really think that, as we've evolved into technology has left the contents of, IT. It's really, started to become the main focus in every line of business. So with that being said, those line of businesses want their own technology to satisfy their business needs. So, where, again, thinking back 10, 15 years ago, your critical or important vendors was probably on one sheet of paper, maybe 10 to 15.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at, hundreds. And that's just our immediate vendors, not our vendors' vendors or our vendors' vendors' vendors.
And I was thinking before, it's like, you guys have a lot of challenges compared to bigger institutions. But the point you just made, there's maybe an advantage in the sense of, you were sort of implying something around like shadow IT. If I've got different lines of business that then all have their own IT, or even if they don't have their own IT, some of these services are so easy to use. I don't, and the cost is cheap enough. I don't necessarily have to go to IT. It's within my budget to go to somebody to get a service. And now you as a central CTO don't even necessarily know what a line of business is doing. At least when you're a smaller company, the amount of that goes on may be not as much as if you're, a huge corporation that has complete lines of business. They may have literally dozens of people that are in an IT function that corporate IT doesn't even know exists. So I don't know.
There's a whole industry on cloud app discovery nowadays. This idea that who's using what on my network, and typically when people turn it on, they're surprised to see what web services are being used. I think you really need to take a hard line on that, and pick the services you're going to use, and you have to block the rest, because you're right. It doesn't. All it takes is a credit card. Sometimes not even a credit card. Someone can sign up for a service, start using it. We also see, if a client is trying to send us files, they might want to use their file exchange service. We haven't really vetted that, and we don't want to be sending our files back to them using that service. Of course, we really don't want them sending us files using a service we haven't vetted. So shadow IT, even if you're just trying to help a customer, can become a very large problem. And early on, I think the industry tried to accommodate it. And now it's just too much of a risk. You mentioned third-party risk. These are third parties that we haven't even looked at. It's not a huge problem. But then throw on fourth-party risk. Our third parties, like we were just discussing. And to put on top of all that, we're now looking at software bill of materials for our vendors, right? The Log4j and the Log4Shell incidents really shined a light on the fact that our vendors are building products using open source frameworks, pre-existing code, etc. And we don't know what that is. So when there's a vulnerability like Log4Shell, not only do we not know what vendors are affected, but I think the world found out that a lot of vendors didn't know if they were affected. Unlike many vulnerability situations, don't worry, we're not running Exchange 2010, so we're fine there. It took some companies months to figure out if they were using Log4j or had.
I'm going to say there's probably vendors that are doing your management that didn't even realize they were running Log4j. I'm just thinking, hey, I'm using SolarWinds, or I'm using BMC Patrol, or I'm not realizing that product itself is using a commonly, because the case of Log4j, that thing's been around for like decades. I mean, that's just, people are just thinking, well, that's just the way I get information from my log file. It's like, yeah, and the criminals know that too. That's great. So I just want to tell people, if anybody has a question, normally we wait till the very end, but I think because of the sort of interactive nature of our discussion here, as we're talking about topics, if anybody has a question, just feel free to ask a question. It'll show up in my browser. And if you have a question about any of these things, just jump in, ask a question, and we'll throw it out to the group here for discussion. All right. So one of the things I want to get into is I want to kind of see if we can structure this in a little bit on, now we talked about the stage. There's a problem. We all agree there's a problem. Now, how do we address some of these issues? And I'd like to kind of do it sort of from a people, process, and technology standpoint. So on the people side, what I want to throw out there is, it's weird. The economy to me is really weird. It's on the one hand, you seem, it's, there's inflation, there's all these problems, but yet unemployment's at like, 3.7%. So it's like, are you guys having a challenge either hiring people, in sending people? How are you dealing with sort of the challenge of, can I find staff to perform these functions? How many can I afford to have in my budget? How are you dealing with getting resources to deal with these issues? Start with Rich.
So from my perspective, overall in our organization, staffing hasn't been an issue. Outside of IT, right? So when you start looking at the IT and cybersecurity, and you're looking at specific skill sets or specific areas that you want to focus on, sometimes it's been a little bit more challenging. Definitely takes a little bit longer to fill an open role as we continue to expand our staff, trying to find that right fit. One of the other challenges to that is it's not only the technical knowledge, but also being able to fit into the culture, right? So we focus big on our culture throughout the organization, and I focus big on the culture within my department and the IT area. So that's a big sticking piece for me as well. So try to marry the culture and the knowledge is definitely sometimes challenging. We're going through some of that process right now as we're continuing to look to expand our staff. Next year, we'll continue to grow because we need the resources as more and more things, are popping up, like we're talking about, as we bring on more third parties, there's more things that we need to continually review. So it's definitely the resources inside the technology area is definitely, a struggle.
Yeah. How about you, John?
And yeah, staffing's difficult right now, for sure. Thankfully, we haven't been too hit hard by the Great Resignation or, whatever other names you want to throw out there. But, we can't deny that as we go to hire new resources, it's tough. Even entry-level graduates are demanding salaries that are, more mid-tier than entry-level. But when I think about people resources, I obviously look internally, but I think about the people at our vendors. I think about the people at our consulting firms. I think about our peers in the industry, because I think what we realize is that as a smaller financial institution, as a community bank, we can't do it all in-house. And there's some really great talent, and I can speak for community banking, right? I've met some fantastic people, but what you can't replicate as a smaller company or even a medium-sized company is that diversity of thought, that bouncing ideas off people, getting other opinions, seeing what else is out there. And Dave and I used to be consultants actually together. That's how we know each other. And in that industry, we knew what every bank in this region was doing. We consulted a lot of them. We knew people from all the banks. And, speaking for myself, I know when I went in-house in banking, obviously that all went quiet because I'm not working with all these different banks. So, we knew we needed to get vendors and hear what's going on in the industry, see what threats are out there. We knew we needed to collaborate. We actually, the Dave and Rich on this call, we talk very frequently. And, it's funny, we're competing banks, of course, right? I mean, we're actually in very similar footprints. The Dave's headquarters is about, 20 minutes from mine. But sometimes when it comes to cybersecurity, it really does feel like we're coworkers, because our goal is to protect the industry, protect our customers, and that just supersedes the fact that we're different companies. So we're doing a lot of sharing, and I think that's what smaller firms have to do. There's a ton of great resources out there. I think about FSISAC, the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And, if you're not financial services, there are ISACs for everything from automotive to nuclear. So there's some great sharing out there. And, you definitely want to bring stuff to the table. The more you bring to the table, the more people are going to want to collaborate with you. But that's how you do it as a smaller or mid-sized company. You collaborate, you work with people. There's a lot of smart people, but you can't do it all on your own.
That's a great point. How about you, Dave?
No, so I mean, I think that staffing and hiring is a challenge. I mean, all three of us are obviously, well-run, profitable organizations growing, and with that growth, we've got to align the appropriate talent to keep it secure. I mean, I kind of looking at some of the job report numbers, at the 7%. I think in the next month or quarter, we're going to see that number spike up quite a bit. But in the current landscape, it's an employee market. So they're demanding much higher salaries, which exceeded some of our budgets. They're requiring full work from home, which I think the richest point is very difficult to maintain a culture and instill a culture. And let's all call a spade a spade. We're community banks. We should be in the community. We shouldn't be hiring people from California that are part of our staff that don't really live in the community. And I've heard arguments in the past that IT's really not customer facing. IT's really for our employees, but they are our customers. Our employees are our customers, and if we don't know them at a personal level and a cultural level, then I have a strong feeling that it has an impact on the way that we support our people overall. So it's overall challenging, and John put it very well. There are resources out there. If we all read a little bit and then get on a call once a month, it reduces the knowledge intake per person.
Yeah.
The working with consultants and vendors, in specific areas. Coming into banking from a consultant, I have a good understanding of what is a good fit for a consultant and what you have to do in-house just to be nimble and agile. But it's definitely something that's on top of mind, not only for myself, but our executive team, our board. And I think lastly, when trying to bring in talent, especially on the IT side, good IT people do very good job understanding controls and process and mitigating risk. But some IT individuals are kind of put off by a highly regulated industry like banking or even hospital or healthcare. So finding somebody with good talent, it's easier being on a consultant side because you're absolving yourself from responsibility and it's still the customers. But when you're that customer bringing somebody on, it's a different hiring process because now, they've got to really maintain to these, ever-changing landscape with regulations.
Yeah. And I like, I try to combine what you said and what Rich said about the culture stuff. I found when I was running my company, even 4 or 5 years ago, I couldn't find for me to hire somebody with a senior level, like a Cisco certified internet engineer, I'd have to spend $175,000, $200,000, money I didn't have. And so what I often end up doing was I'd get a more junior person, and I'd take the money, the difference between what you pay a junior person and a senior person, and use that money for training. And so you take a junior person, give them all the training, and then give them good promotion so that I take them from 80,000 to 90 to 100, 120. So now all of a sudden I get this person who now is a CCIE. They're happy because I've given them all this training. So it sort of builds a loyalty, and I can get somebody who I imbue with them the culture I want. And whereas I find sometimes they get these CCIE and they're kind of a little bit of a prima donna. It's like, where's my corner office? Where's my company car? Where's my heated latte when I come into the office? I'm like, no, I want you to be a team player. So I get that person, make them a team player, and then make them feel like, oh my God, this is a great place. I came in, they trained me, I'm now worth a lot more. There's a little bit of a risk to that because now if I train somebody their CCA, they could leave and make more money, but hopefully they'll stay because they love the environment they're in and they love the fact that I've given them a bunch of these opportunities. And I think you can extend that to security and other IT things as well.
I think it's difficult in an employee-driven market right now to always kind of, adopt that philosophy. I mean, also, again, I know I fall into that millennial bucket, but I don't act that way. But a lot of people in that bucket are younger, are looking for those quick hits. You can see the average retention and average stay at a company go dramatically down from the baby boomer, era, where they were lifetime employees, 20-year employees. Now you're lucky to hold on to somebody for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And I think some of the companies' fears are, if I invest this money in the training, am I going to be able to retain them, long term? Which is where, again, vendors and partners come into the mix, but they're dealing with the same issues. Just
Right.
because we've outsourced it to a vendor doesn't mean they can find any more talent quicker than I can. So it's something that's constantly, you're thinking about, constantly, preparing around. But I wholeheartedly agree. I'd much rather make my own, engineer than bring somebody in and not know what I'm getting.
Right. Great point.
Well,
So
not
let's-
to be cliche, but I've always enjoyed the quote. Well, what if we train them and then they leave, and then the response is, well, what if we don't train them and they stay, right? And that's very real. I mean, you have to train your employees. It is good to build a career path, and don't forget too that when you train someone, if you're investing money into that training, they're going to courses. And you can contractually ask them to pay that back if they were to resign after a certain period of time, right? So there are business approaches to sort of insulate yourself from them training, going to all these academies, paying for certifications, and then immediately departing. It doesn't negate the risk entirely, of course, but it does sort of set a precedent that we are investing in you. We hope that you invest in us. Building a culture, as you all were talking about, where they want to stay, where they can use their training them on technology that you actually use and implement.
Yeah.
And what I really like to do is when engineers go to training, they may be a junior engineer, but I want them to come back with something that they bring to the table. I don't want to say, hey, I'm caught up with the senior engineer now, I think I can do some of the stuff they're doing. Well, what are we doing and what can we do better? And that really makes them more invested, involved. Again, none of these are absolute guarantees that they won't leave the company, but I think there's a way to approach training and that they feel the benefit too, and that's
That's great. Now let's just shift to a process. And I think somebody had mentioned something about like incident response plans, disaster recovery business continuity plans. How have you seen that change over time, or are you leveraging things like that to try to make your company sort of more agile and more resilient in the presence of these constantly increasing security threats? And I'll just throw it to anybody to answer that right now.
I can dive in with that. I think that I could speak practically from the consulting experience and really from a Unity Bank experience. I've seen years ago, you're talking about 515, where business continuity plans and incident response plans were 600-page documents that quote unquote passed the weight test. Like it's heavy enough and thick enough that it's probably going to work. I don't think that works anymore. From a Unity Bank side, we had a several 100-page business continuity plan that we whittled down to sub 40. One, I think that lends into today's world of instant gratification. Nobody reads a 600-page anything anymore. You're lucky if you can get people to read past the headline or the subject line in an email. So you've got to create something that's easily consumed, agile enough, but also kind of checking the appropriate boxes to get you into there. I think the other aspect that's really radically changed is there was a big, push to identify the top 10 or top 15, 20, 100 threats to your organization and build out like full incident response plans, how are we going to assess this? Well, given the change, in the last few years, there are an ever-growing number of threats that it's nearly impossible for you to document a response to every one of them. And if you can't document a response to every one of them, why document it for 1 or 5 or 10 or 15? It's really about making sure that that response plan, contacts the necessary people, your insurance company, your third-party SOC, your vendors, the FBI, the regulatory agencies. You go through that process. And then, from there, it's being agile and adapting to what that is, and really understanding. I think that the furthest you can take that is possibly preparing something internally and possibly externally, some small communications that we're aware and more information may be coming out down the road. But, you also don't want to disclose too much too soon before your team has had an opportunity to fully vet and investigate the event that occurred.
Good point. What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, I mean, incident response now is critical, and the key piece of that is being able to react as quick as possible, right? So we need to be aware of a potential incident that's going on, so we can react. We all have our sort of processes and procedures around, how to vet those things out, and whether it's a false positive or we sort of have to take it to the next level. So I know I mentioned, we sort of test our incident response a lot due to the false positives and the way that, we structure different types of alerts or critical events that we're constantly looking into, and we follow the same process every time. So it becomes second nature. So we know, okay, this is the process we take, and once we validate whether it's a false positive or not, now we know what the next step is. Outside of, in the past, incident response sort of we had, these documents, and only key people knew what that incident response plan, looked like. The key now is to train the entire organization, where if they believe potentially something's going on, to alert us immediately, right? The quicker we could be aware of something, the quicker we could jump in and investigate. So I think that's the biggest piece now is, like we talked about earlier, someone's going to click on a phishing email, right? So to train them to let us know immediately versus, hey, if I don't tell anyone, maybe no one will find out.
Right.
Trying to sort of, build that culture and train them on, things are going to happen. We get it. So the quicker you let us know, the quicker we could vet it out.
Well, I think to that point there, it's a fine balance between carrot and stick. You use the stick too much, you're going to get users that might click on that link, that might click on that, and all the tools we have implemented, it might slip through that monitoring or that tool. So, while you want to be firm with the stick and deter people from hiding it, you also want to reward people through either competitions, swag, things like that to really highlight the people that are doing the right thing, to create that culture, of security awareness. So, you can leverage your employees as extensions of your cybersecurity team and monitoring overall.
Yeah. Hey, one of the things one of our clients did, which I thought was really, I hadn't seen this before, but I thought was actually really clever. They do periodic, security awareness training for the people, and they do that maybe twice a year. In addition to that, they have a third-party company that does these scripts, that does, sort of pen tests, and they'll run these emails. And so it's a security testing company. If you click the bogus email, then you get a report saying, hey, what percentage of the people that we tested clicked on a bad link? But in addition to that, what they do is, if they do this test, like say once a month on random people, but if somebody fails, what they do is they automatically redirect that individual employee to remedial security training on stuff. So instead of impacting everybody, you just get the training on the person who needs it, which I thought was kind of clever. So, John, how about you?
Yeah, well, and you put it perfectly. I mean, training and testing. We find that the biggest value from testing is that people get rid of this notion that it's not going to happen to me, or no one's going to come after me, or I'm just a teller at a branch part time, because they think like, well, is this company testing me? And sometimes people get an email and they'll say, oh, was this one of your tests? And we'll say, well, no, that was the real thing. Thank you for teaching me. which is great. But there's really it's really hard to break that mindset of like, well, yeah, I get that this stuff happens, but it's not gonna happen to me, or if it does, I'm gonna be smart enough to catch it. I will say that talking about instant response plans, probably the biggest thing that we've learned over the years is that they need to be actionable. These plans are for you, right? So there's no statistics on this, but I wouldn't be surprised if a large amount of companies, when they have an actual incident, don't even bother pulling out their instant response plan. Maybe the first 10 pages of it is, what is an incident, or and that's all important. But you need to get to the point where, okay, this is a run book, this is an action plan. I'll give you a good example. In a lot of the major ransomware attacks against large companies, one of the actions they take is, we're going to shut down our internet, right? And so it really brings the question, well, how do you do that? This isn't 1993 anymore, where you can go down in the basement and unplug one plug and now the internet's down. What does the company look like with no internet? Are you actually solving a problem? A lot of companies have done that because we observe some suspicious activity. We're going to shut down the internet, make sure nothing's leaving the company in any way that we aren't detecting it. It makes a lot of sense to do. It's a very powerful thing to do in a very severe situation. But how many companies would be able to say, okay, here's who we got to call, or here's what we got to do, or here's the router we have to log in to make that happen? Because if you can't answer that very quickly, when the executive makes the call, shut everything down, and it takes you 6 hours to figure out how to do that, think of how much data could be exfiltrated.
And can you even do that, John? I mean, it's one thing to say I've got an AS400 in my office that I can prevent access to. But again, you guys are all using third-party service providers. You're not shutting down Jack Henry, right? The thing is, your people are working from home. So even if you shut down internet access at PPAC Gladstone at your building, that doesn't mean Janet, who's sitting in her house in Marlboro, can't get out to the internet, and she's going to be using the internet, and she's going to Jack Henry and Fiserv, and she's going to be using Salesforce.com for customer relationship management stuff. So it's like, what are you really shutting down when you say you shut down the internet today compared to what that meant 10 years ago even?
Well, I think to that point, I mean, the challenge that we're all experiencing is the model 10 years ago worked. Protect the box, protect everything in that box. Well, to that point of, Salesforce and external pieces, we've greatly enhanced and expanded our, review of, not only critical applications, but, high risk, medium applications. And part of that review is not just vendor management and what they're doing. It's a deep dive into access controls, or do the people that have access to that have the appropriate access? Is it too much? Really trying to get to that least privilege. But then furthermore, we've extended it into the configurations of it. Is there multi-factor available, and is there, the opportunity to whitelist an IP where only that box can access it? So, even though the world is growing exponentially outward, a lot of these companies realize that the best defense is what we talked about 10 years ago. Build a wall, put everything you need behind it, and protect that wall. And I think a lot of those security configurations where you can limit access outside of those organizations, outside, so you can't log on right from home. You've got to come into the organization through a secure tunnel, then access those pieces. So we've made a concentrated effort to really go through that. And every year we add probably 15 to 20 applications to that process. And it's a continuing process, because maybe at the time of the review, they didn't have MFA or they didn't have IP whitelisting, but now they do. So it's an evergreen process that you've got to continue the evaluation and kind of bring them back to the same thing. I mean, I think we can all agree that, the same blocking and tackling that was effective years ago is the same thing that works today. It's just called something different, and it might be a different software. But at the end of the day, you're still protecting those assets, identifying those assets, and doing what you can to kind of, build that wall.
Yeah, and what you all that you just said, Dave, leads right into technology, which is sort of the last thing we got in the last few minutes. When I think about technology, I think about security. there's so much that's changing, and I'm just going to throw it out there, right? I mean, there's a million things, right? You can look at things like zero trust architecture. I go from having network-based security to really sort of, don't trust anything, right? Like, instead of this big wall, there is no wall because everything's everywhere. So it's like really, your assumption is don't trust anything, and you only allow things access on an as-needed basis based on a certain context. So there's things like zero trust architecture. I look at security. There's so many different types of security, right? I mean, you've got identity access management, firewall, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, software-defined perimeters. I mean, on and on and on. Right? Intrusion exfiltration prevention, data loss prevention. So just in our final minutes, I'm thinking, how do you look at technology, and does it become is it an opportunity where there's more things there, or is it actually creating more confusion than answers when you look at all this technology as it relates to security? So, John, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question because there's a lot out there. I think everyone in IT, we get about 7 LinkedIn messages a day from various software vendors, and there's a lot out there. This is where having peers in the industry, joining collaboration groups, keeping in touch with people, probably pays the most dividends, right? You want to talk to people who are using similar technologies. Maybe they're using them today. Okay, how do you like it? How's it working? Maybe they're going down the same path as you, and you're both doing proof of concepts at the same time. This is one of those areas where you don't want to go it alone, and you can. Because if you just trust what a salesperson does, even if you do proof of concept, sometimes that doesn't really quite get you the whole story. So having peers in the industry, and also talking with consulting firms. Jerry, your firm does a lot of work in this space as well too. What are the products? What are feedback? You can also aggregate across multiple companies and really go large scale with that. But that's critical because there's 1,000 choices out there, and software as a service, it's a big game changer for smaller companies. It's opened up a lot of options. I mean, I don't have a budget of a major bank, of a mega bank, right? But I also don't have the same number of people. In the past, the problem was that, how would we possibly stand up all this infrastructure and then patch it and maintain it and support it and all the hardware? But now it's, we're just paying for the same license that a major bank is paying for. Right. And, I have many peers in major banks, and yeah, there's several software where we're using the exact same products. Which is really great and really opens up a lot of doors. Our configurations might be different, but it's created a lot of opportunity. And so if you can take advantage of that opportunity, yes, it is feasible for a 50-person company to be on the same licensing of a security product as a major corporation. The licensing's scalable. It's usually per user. So you're just paying for 50 users, right? It is a big game changer, but it opens up maybe too many doors for small companies. It can be overwhelming. And that's where, again, we just all need to collaborate and work with our peers, our vendors, our consultants.
Yeah. Is there anything any of you guys have seen that you either say, wow, here's some new technology that came out that I was really impressed with, or the other way around, something that had a lot of hype, I checked it out, and man, I can't figure out what the utility of this thing is that everybody seems to think is so great?
Well, I won't call it a specific technology, but I think the evolution of extended detection and response softwares has really made it, ease the burden a little bit from, log correlation and looking there. I mean, as we evolved over time, it was SIEM. So you're collecting we're going to collect all the logs, well, then the obvious question is, what do we do with those logs? There wasn't much intelligence built in those legacy products, where now with these, extended detection and response, tools, the mindset's still the same. Throw everything in there, because one little log might be low risk, but when combined with 7 or 8 other logs that are coming from your firewall, the web filter, X, Y, and Z, though the combination of that now raises to a higher risk level where you got to put some eyes on it. And I think, that's the evolution in the detection part. But what's really interesting is the automated response. You can then create playbooks, scripts, leveraging all of this data that you're getting in there. And if something hits you to a high or critical event, now you have an opportunity to take that asset, that computer, that server X, Y, or Z, and immediately isolate that from the network. And I think, to John's point, and even Rich's, it's how quick you can react. It happens, it's there, but how quickly can you react? Even when you outsource a SOC to another company, oftentimes they're not tied or close to the lines of business. They don't understand everything you do. They're just looking at logs. So you normally don't allow them to have carte blanche to shut your network down to remediate something. So that lag between them identifying it, contacting you, understanding to shut down is extensive. But when you look at the automated responses, you may be able to isolate an individual asset almost in near real time and prevent the spread, to where you can look at that, take that offline, and mitigate a much smaller threat rather than one that's going to evolve over the 30 minutes, hour, 2 hours that it takes you to investigate.
Yeah.
Hey, Rich, if I could just add to that, Dave.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think bringing up MDR, XDR, very good point. This is the first time that small companies can have a true 24/7 eyes on glass SOC, right? There's people waiting to respond at 2 a.m. in the morning, and it's become affordable and it works, right? I mean, the technology is not perfect, don't get me wrong, but the one thing that and how our world's changed, right? We have a holiday coming up next week. It's Thanksgiving, right? If you think about it, there's a very high likelihood that there's an attacker sitting on a network somewhere waiting for Thanksgiving because they know that IT is going to go, people are going to be hard to reach. Also, even if your IT team's available, the vendors are going to be hard to reach, and they're sitting there waiting. This has happened almost every major holiday weekend we've had for the past few years. Some company, whether you hear it or not, some company has a major ransomware event by an attacker who's just sitting there waiting. And that's probably a very good reason why you need to be considering managed MDR, XDR, 24/7 eyes on glass, because these things, they do hit now at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And if you can't respond until 6 a.m., it's all done by then. If you're waking up at 5:30 and you realize something hit at 2 a.m., you might as well have not even looked at it till the next day because everything is done by then.
And the only thing I want to say about artificial intelligence is, to echo a little bit of what you're saying is, I think sometimes there's a little bit too much promise from people, like, I'm going to pinpoint and isolate all your problems. And I think that's a little bit too optimistic to say that. But what I do like, the analogy I like is, because the threats are constantly changing. So I think about it like you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, but I don't know what the needle looks like, right? And I think a lot of the AI things are really trying to claim too much to say they can find the needle. Well, and while they can't find the needle in the haystack, I think you still need human beings to look at real information to figure out what the needle is. You can certainly get rid of the hay. So that's what I like to say is I may not be able to identify the needle, but I can certainly get rid of the hay. So that is helpful. It may not be perfect, but it can be really, really helpful. Rich, I'll give you any final thoughts on this area before we close it up.
Yeah, I think another key piece outside of, the MDRs, XDRs is sort of the tools around identity protection, right? And risky behaviors and abnormal behaviors. By able to identify, abnormal behaviors and lock out accounts, and sort of helps a lot with potentially if credentials are compromised. And I usually log into New Jersey, and now 10 minutes later, I'm trying to log in from Missouri, right? Lock out that account and alert us. I think those type of things are great tools to have as well.
No, that's great. Hey, I really appreciate all you guys for coming on here. Thank everybody for coming on. I appreciate everybody joining us. I just want to identify people a couple attachments here. You can link on the attachments tab in the Break Talk page, and from there, you can either learn more about Nemertes, our small business offering, some of the things we can do to help people with this kind of security thing. Also, if you want to connect with the Nemertes online community, that's a free thing where we can have chats like this to talk about emerging technology and security and various types of IT infrastructure issues that affect everybody. Feel free to do that. You can send something to me directly. But again, thanks to John, Rich, and Dave. I appreciate you guys taking the time to discuss this. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you, everybody, for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.